Hello students, welcome to AriserTalent. As you know, we are studying the important chapter of biology, that is the fundamental unit of life. Now we are studying the cell organelles. Cell organelles are what? They are membrane bound subcellular structures of the cell. Okay, they perform various activities as they are specific in shape and they perform specific functions. In this we have already studied about endoplasmic reticulum, Golgi apparatus and lysosome. Now we will talk about mitochondria. So now we will discuss about mitochondria. So here we will go with the structure of mitochondria. You can see the structure of mitochondria when you see it in the under the electron microscope. You can see that mitochondria has two membranes, outer membrane and inner membrane. Okay, outer membrane is generally smooth and has porous protein. Okay, then inner membrane, if we talk about the inner membrane, then inner membrane is semi-permeable and it enfolds inside and form finger-like projections. These projections are known as cristae. Okay, if you look the structure properly, then we can see that these cristae bears some enzymes and some particles here. These particles are generally known as F1 particles or oxysomes. Okay, generally they are the responsible to generate ATP and they synthesize enzymes here. Okay, and if we talk about this fluid which is known as matrix, which is present inside the inner membrane, this matrix contains DNA and ribosomes and other particles. Okay, generally these DNA and ribosomes are responsible to synthesize protein and enzymes. This is the reason that this mitochondria is also known as autonomous, because it DNA and ribosomes can synthesize their protein and enzymes. Okay, now the space between outer membrane and inner membrane, we can see that the space between outer membrane and inner membrane is known as intermembrane space. Okay, now let's talk about the structure. First of all, it was discovered by Colliker. Okay, now structure. We can see that mitochondria has two membranes. It has two membranes, outer membrane and inner membrane. Okay. Outer membrane, generally it is smooth and made of porous protein. Outer membrane. It is smooth and has porous protein for exchange of, or we can say it forms channels for passage of molecules. Okay, next is inner membrane. Generally inner membrane is semi-permeable, means it allows only the selected particles to pass through it. It is semi-permeable, enfolds inside and forms finger-like projections It forms finger-like projections called cristae. Okay, so hope it is clear that mitochondria has two types of membrane, outer membrane and inner membrane, and outer membrane is smooth and it is made up of porous protein which allows or which can make the channels for the exchange of molecules or for the passes of molecules. Then we go inside, then inner membrane enfolds and forms the finger-like projections. These are called cristae. Now cristae, if we talk about the cristae next, we have talked about membrane, now we will talk about cristae. Next is cristae. Generally cristae are finger-like projections. They are finger-like projections they contain or they bear, we can say they bear F1 particles and enzymes. Okay, next is matrix. Inside, or we can say between the outer membrane and inner membrane, the space is known as intermembrane space. Generally it contains a transparent fluid. Next is space between outer membrane and inner membrane is known as intermembrane space. Intermembrane space that contains transparent fluid. Okay, so this is all about the inner membrane space. Okay, it has transparent fluid in it. Now next we will talk about what that is matrix. Or first of all we will talk about F1 particles. As I told you that cristae bear small particles, they are known as F1 particles. So here we will talk about F1 particles or oxysomes. F1 particles. Next is F1 particles. What are F1 particles? Generally they are also known as oxysomes. They are also known as oxysome. They are tennis racket like shape, or we can say they are of tennis racket like shape, or they have tennis racket like shape, and they are the site for ATP synthesis. They are site of ATP synthesis. They are site of ATP synthesis. Okay, they are the site of ATP generation or ATP synthesis. What are they here? They are F1 particles. They are also known as oxysomes. Next we will talk about matrix. What is matrix? Matrix is a fluid. It's a fluid. It's a fluid present inside the inner membrane, or present, we can say these are present between the cristae. Here we can see these are present inside the inner membrane between the cristae. Okay, here these are cristae. So, inside the inner membrane, here this fluid is present. So, we can say it is a fluid present inside the inner membrane between the cristae. Okay, it contains what? It contains DNA and ribosome. Okay, generally it contains DNA and ribosome, and just because of the presence of DNA and ribosome, generally mitochondria is also known as semi-autonomous, because DNA and ribosome can synthesize their own protein and enzymes. As I told you, cristae are the finger-like projection. Okay, so thus they increase the surface area of mitochondria. Okay. So, this is all about the structure of mitochondria, that first of all mitochondria has two membrane, outer membrane and inner membrane. Outer membrane is made up of smooth and porous protein, and inner membrane enfolds and forms the finger-like projections. Okay, and generally it bears F1 particles, those are responsible for ATP generation. And inside the inner membrane there is a matrix which is a fluid, and it contains DNA and ribosomes. Okay, and DNA and ribosomes are responsible for the protein and enzyme synthesis. So, this was all about the structure of mitochondria. Now, we will talk about functions of mitochondria. Okay, now we will talk about the functions of mitochondria. Functions of mitochondria. What are the functions of mitochondria? First of all, it is the seat of cell respiration. Here we can mention that mitochondria is seat of cell respiration. How it is the seat of cell respiration? That it uses molecular oxygen, means O2. It uses molecular oxygen and brings out stepwise oxidation of food stuff. It releases, or we can say in this process it releases ATP. In this process ATP means adenosine triphosphate. In this process ATP is released, which is used by the cell for the further functions. Okay, which is used by the cell for various activities. Okay, beside it, mitochondria is also seat of biosynthesis of amino acid. Mitochondria is also seat of biosynthesis of amino acid. Okay, so these are the main two functions of mitochondria, that it is the seat of cell respiration as it use molecular oxygen means O2 to break down the foodstuff for the oxidation of foodstuff, and then it release energy in the form of ATP, which is used by the cell for other activities. Okay, and it is also the seat of biosynthesis of amino acid. Now, two questions are generally come in the exams related to mitochondria. First of all, why the mitochondria is known as powerhouse of the cell, and why the mitochondria is known as semi-autonomous. So, here we go with those important points. What are the important points about mitochondria? As I told you that mitochondria helps in the cellular respiration, and that time it releases ATP. Okay, generally ATP, here I told you that in Christie F1 particles means oxysomes are present here that help in that process and they release ATP. ATP is adenosine triphosphate. Okay, so this ATP is used by the cell to perform various activities. This is the reason that mitochondria is known as powerhouse of the cell, because it provides energy to the cell for various activity. Clear? So, here we can mention, it is an important point, mitochondria is known as powerhouse of the cell, because it provides energy to the cell in the form of ATP. ATP means adenosine triphosphate. This is the reason that cell can utilize energy and perform various functions. Okay, and this is the reason that mitochondria is known as powerhouse of the cell. Generally, what is the function of powerhouse? It provides electricity, it provides energy. Okay, same here, the mitochondria is providing energy to the cell. This is the reason that mitochondria is known as powerhouse of the cell. Next is, mitochondria is also known as semi-autonomous because mitochondria is called semi-autonomous because it has its own DNA which can replicate independently, and it has ribosomes which can synthesize protein, Okay, thus mitochondria is known as semi-autonomous as DNA and ribosome can synthesize protein and enzymes. Thus, mitochondria is called semi-autonomous as DNA and ribosomes can synthesize their own enzymes and proteins. Okay, so these are the important point about mitochondria. Generally questions come on these important topics. One comes like in the form of why mitochondria is known as powerhouse of the cell and why mitochondria is known as semi-autonomous. Okay, so this was all about the mitochondria. Hope it is clear to you that why mitochondria is known as powerhouse of the cell, because it contains Christie, and Christie has F1 particles. Generally these F1 particles help in the generating ATP. Okay, and as we all know that mitochondria does the process of cell respiration, as it is the seat of cell respiration. At that time it releases energy in the form of ATP, and that ATP is released by which particle? F1 particle take part in that process, and this energy is utilized by the cell for further activities. This is the reason that mitochondria is powerhouse of the cell. Hope the topic is clear to you. And I hope if you really wish to get more videos, interesting videos, and if you want to get the question answers, you can subscribe our channel, that is AriserTalent. Thank you.